Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the White House. And thank you, Nancy, for that kind introduction, and thank you to everyone for being here today. We've got members of the Diplomatic Corps, we've got representatives from NGOs and international organizations that are doing outstanding work to serve refugees around the world. And I want to particularly recognize the 10 champions of change who we are honoring today. Thank you for your commitment to lifting up the lives of your fellow men and women. This is a moment where we need real champions. Around the world, we're facing a more diffuse terrorist threat, political upheavals and violence that are destabilizing the Middle East, conflicts in African countries, and Russian aggression against Ukraine. The Syrian conflict alone has produced nearly 4 million refugees and twice that many internally displaced persons. Yet too often, these refugee populations that the conflicts create don't get the attention that they deserve. This isn't something we can ignore. As you know so well, last week, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees announced staggering new numbers. Around the world, almost 60 million people have been forced to flee their homes. That's the highest number on record. At the same time, the number of refugees who were able to return home in 2014 was at the lowest level in 3 decades. More than half of refugees are children, and greater than 85% are living in developing countries. So, to sum it up, conflict and privation are creating more refugees. Wars are dragging on longer. Millions of kids are spending their formative years in transit. And refugee populations are concentrated in areas with the fewest resources to see to their needs. Clearly, there's a moral imperative to help refugees reclaim their lives. But as National Security Advisor, I can tell you that it's also in our strategic interest. In our interconnected world, instability bleeds across borders. Deprivation and lack of opportunity can drive people to embrace extremist ideologies. So by helping host governments like Lebanon, Kenya, and Jordan bear the strain of a large guest population, we support regional and global stability. By providing on-site assistance, we remove incentives for refugees to pay predatory human smugglers, many of whom are part of transnational criminal networks. By creating opportunities for local integration and third country resettlement, we help millions of people rejoin the global economy. That's why the United States will continue to lead the world on refugee issues, just as we have for decades. Welcoming the homeless and tempest-tossed is fundamental to our American character. It says so right on the Statue of Liberty. Let me briefly describe a few of the ways we're making this a continued priority in the U.S. government. First, we maintain the largest refugee resettlement program in the world. Since 1975, we've resettled in the United States more than 3 million people fleeing conflict and persecution. Now, with safeguards to protect national security, we're working to expand the number of refugees we resettle each year to respond to the recent surge in refugees. And we're improving our ability to reach populations in need, including those in hard-to-reach areas. For instance, we're supporting infrastructure and putting more people in the field in places like eastern Chad, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Burundi, and the Dadaab and Kakuma refugee camps in Kenya. Second, the United States is the world's largest donor of humanitarian assistance. Much of that funding supports refugees overseas, including those affected by the conflict in Syria. And today, I'm announcing another $360 million in assistance to help ease the suffering of so many innocent Syrians, bringing our total to more than $4 billion since the conflict began. In addition to providing food, water, medical care, shelter, and other daily necessities, we're focused on supporting the most vulnerable refugees. Our Safe from the Start initiative takes on gender-based violence in refugee communities. And with the No Lost Generation initiative, we seek to keep displaced Syrian children from missing out on years of their education. Third, we engage on refugee protection issues with governments around the world. We raise these issues early and often and at the very highest levels. We encourage countries to keep their borders open so people can escape zones of conflict. We insist that camps remain open for as long as it's unsafe for people to return. And we offer generous support to countries hosting large refugee populations, not just funding to meet the needs of refugees, but investments in the host country's strained economy, infrastructure, and education and healthcare systems. This challenge is far too great for any one nation to shoulder alone. Nor can this be just the work of governments. Partnership is vital to meet the needs of so many. And that's why we collaborate with countless international NGOs and domestic NGOs, including so many of you, to share best practices and to respond quickly and effectively when problems arise. By every metric, caring for refugees is a smart investment, because when you invest in people, their talents and their dreams, the benefit comes back to us many times over. We've got examples of that right here in this room. Monet Ai was born and grew up in a refugee camp in Thailand. Gatluak Ter Thach was a former child soldier and refugee from South Sudan. They overcame great hardships, but they never gave up. And today they are two of our champions of change, passionate advocates for their fellow refugees. Monet, Gatluak. Monet and Gatluak didn't just persevere, they prospered. And like them, every single person living in a camp or sheltering in a community far from home has great potential. Last Saturday, as you know, was World Refugee Day. But for all those living in uncertainty, the men, the women, and overwhelmingly the children, one day is not nearly enough. We have to keep them at the heart of our mission every day. That's the work so many of you have committed yourselves to, and that's the work we're advancing today. American leadership has been critical to assisting in resettling refugees around the world, and we are 100% committed to making sure that continues. As always, we'll lead the charge to protect and provide for refugees. We'll keep our doors open to those in need of relief, and we will continue to work tirelessly to bring an end to the conflicts and strife that endanger so many people around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Ambassador Rice for her comments, for being a continual voice, a forceful champion for change, and for the kind of U.S. global leadership that has led to the $4 billion of humanitarian support for the Syrian refugees and displaced inside of Syria. This That's a wonderful announcement and is extraordinarily important. I want to also just acknowledge and thank our remarkable colleagues at the State Department Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migration. A wonderful colleague and friend, Ann Richard, who leads that effort, is not with us today, but we have her team members, Simon Henshaw, Kelly Clements, who have been at the forefront of a lot of these efforts. So please join me in acknowledging them. And our many colleagues at USAID, Food for Peace, and others throughout the government who have been incredible champions for change on this issue. And with that, I'd like to call forward the champions we are honoring today. And our first champion, who we heard a little bit about from Ambassador Rice, Mo Nai, if you could come up and join us. Mo Nai was born in the Mela refugee camp in Thailand, where she lived for 19 years before resettling in the United States. And today, Mon is a US citizen, and not only that, an active one, a co-founder of the Ethnic Minority of Burma Advocacy and Resource Center in Iowa. Sasha Chenoff joins us from Massachusetts, where he's the founder and executive director of Refuge Point. Sasha has worked for 2 decades in refugee rescue, relief, and resettlement operations in the United States and in Africa. Thank you, Sasha. Michael Igodora is an advocate for HIV prevention and LGBTI rights from the Bronx. Michael fled from his native Nigeria to avoid persecution because of his lifestyle and advocacy work, and he's currently a program and policy assistant at the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition. Our next champion is Mariella Shaker. Mariella is an accomplished violinist from Aleppo in Syria, and she first came to Illinois to study music and was here as Syria descended into violence. She's been unable to return to her family and has applied for asylum and has remained here in the United States. Thank you, Mariella. And our final champion is Gatluak Thach. Champion and CEO of the Nashville International Center for Empowerment, which has the wonderful acronym NICE. He's a former child soldier and a refugee from South Sudan. Gatluak taught himself English. He worked several jobs and eventually founded NICE, which serves refugees from 72 different countries. So we have a powerful example of panelists who have come here not just to find refuge for themselves, but to use their voice and their power to make a difference in so many others. And last but very much not least, I'd like to introduce Andrew Harper. Andrew is one of the heroes of the refugee world. He's been working with refugees since the first Gulf War. I've met Andrew several times in Amman, where he has been coordinating the international response to the Syrian crisis in Jordan as a representative of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees to Jordan. Andrew is tireless in his dedication to these issues, and he will be serving as moderator for today's panel. Over to you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you very much, Nancy. I should be sitting here?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, I think calling anyone from UNHCR a hero is undermining the focus, and the focus has to be on the champions here today. And because everything we do is in order to try and unlock the potential of the millions of refugees and displaced people that we have around the world. And it's already been said in the opening introductions by Ambassador Rice and Nancy that we've never been faced with such a chronic and deteriorating refugee situation. Beginning of 2014, the estimates were around 51 million people who had been displaced. By the end of the year, we're looking at over 60 million. The question is, what will we be facing by the end of this year, and the year after, and the year after that? and what needs to change to try and terminate this madness that is taking place around the world. The madness which is impacting millions of people, just like our champions who are here, champions who have been able to escape the trap, the refugee camps, the urban poverty, and due to the largesse and generosity and opportunities provided by the US, make something of their lives. As a non-US person, I can categorically say that without the US, the situation impacting refugees around the world would be far worse. It's not just the money, it's not just the resettlement spaces, it's also the moral leadership. It's the moral leadership in order to try and ensure that countries keep their borders open, that countries who should be contributing more do contribute more. And I've got nothing but praise for the teams, whether it be in PRM, our great friends, in USAID, but also the civil society, the NGOs who work tirelessly on the front line, and not only in the areas of asylum, such as in Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey and Iraq, but also inside Syria, trying to ensure that assistance is being provided to the refugees. This panel, because there'll be two panels, this panel will be focusing on the lives of our champions in relation to prior to coming to the US. We have to take advantage of their insights, their experience, their networks, to provide us with examples on how we can do better. Because when we're faced with 60 million people who are in need, what has gone on before is no longer acceptable. We don't have the resources, we don't have the protection space, and people no longer have the tolerance. So I am not going to preach. I'm trying not to talk too long, but I would like to try and draw out anecdotes, recommendations, personal elements which we could use, which we could take away with us to help us inform future discussions and decisions. The toughest part of my job today is to try and keep everyone on time. So we're going to try and have a short, sharp exchange with the panellists to ensure that we get as much feedback as possible, trying to keep the interventions to 60 to 90 seconds or so. This is what Ronnie has told me. So this is what I have to try and do. And this will go on for about 20 minutes. After that, we will open up the floor to take questions from the audience here. And I know there's a lot of family and friends of the champions here who must be extremely proud of seeing them here, just as I am, because often when you're working with refugees, you only see them in the field or in the area of displacement. It's just so rewarding to see people unlock their potential, take advantage of their lives, and be inspirations to others. So that being said, as Marielle is here, right next to me, and given that Syria represents to my own operation in Jordan one of the largest, obviously, population groups, I'd just like to ask Marielle, what do you define as probably one of the most important elements which changed your life? Was there an opportunity? Was there a unique experience which allowed you to escape this endless cycle of displacement and poverty in Syria? I know that you're a musician. I know that you're obviously a very good musician because you're provided with a scholarship. But there must have been much more than just being a musician. Would you like to share an experience with us?
Of course. It gives me a great pleasure to be featured today at this event. In light of the war in Syria, a humanitarian disaster threatens an entire generation. I was one of these young people in Syria whose dreams were eventually destroyed and lost in the war. What kind of crisis are we dealing with? The taste of happiness fades daily, and the principal concern transforms into the question of whether one in Syria will be able to see the morning the next day. There is nothing worse than experiencing death in Aleppo to each moment.
Is there, going to Michael. Michael, you recently returned back from the refugee camps in Kenya. Is there anything which you would like to comment on in relation to whether the situation was worse than you expected, or whether agencies were doing an effective job in responding to the needs of particularly vulnerable groups, not only LGBTI, but all vulnerable groups? Is there one or two recommendations that you would like to provide to the audience here?
Sure. First of all, I would like to say I'm really extremely honored to be sitting here today, to be honored from the White House. I went for a walk in Kenya, in Nairobi, and I happened to hear about the situation that's affecting LGBT refugees in Kenya camp, and I had the opportunity to speak to some of them and even visited them. And what I saw with my eyes was, I thought maybe seeking asylum in other countries was difficult, but what I saw with my eyes in those camps were extremely, something that no one would ever wish for. Sometimes not having food to eat, not knowing what your day will be like, not knowing when you're going to be living there, or sometimes just you're going to be there forever, or you don't know who's going to come for you. And especially the transgenders in those groups, they are treated like male. They're treated like men. There's no difference between transgender and the other population. So the fact that their issues are not taken care of, they are treated like everyone else because they have specific issues that need to be dealt with. So they are treated like just everyone else. They don't get their hormones, they don't get their treatment because they are refugee camps. Their situation are not catered for. So those kind of groups, those extremely groups that are discriminated against into such camps need to be taken care of. Look, they are in Kenya, and and we know what it is for LGBT people in Africa. Not looking at refugees and now and also LGBT in Africa, in refugee camps in Africa. The discrimination, the stigma, and the issue they have to face with the officials there. So it was extremely difficult for me to take as a person, just thinking that I'm an asylum seeker and then knowing that even thinking my situation was worse, but just seeing what others have to go through.
And I think what we'll do is we'll go through, and I'd like to try and get, because you've just come out from Kenya and you've seen the difficulties, the hardships, the misery, and the vulnerability of LGBTI. And I'm just wondering whether there's any particular recommendations which you might be able to sort of provide to us, which we could give to the people who are managing the camps or to the government. But hold those thoughts for a second. Monet, you obviously spent a long time in a refugee camp. With 19 years. You're now in the US, and now you're a champion of refugees who have also been resettled to the US. Are there any particular elements which you have, or is there a particular instance which changed the way which you approached refugees, which said, this is the way that I've got to help refugees in the future. This is the way which I want to work.
Yeah, my name is Monet, and first I would like to thank the White House for this tremendous honor and recognition, and I would like to share this with my other 6 other board members and co-founder of Embark, because if I were in the camp, I might not get to come here, not even in DC, so I'm so glad to be here. And next, I would like to thank ORR for the self-help grant that was so important for helping Embark to grow its organization, and thank you for believing in our strength and community and giving us the opportunity. The work that you do is critically important for us. And as a refugee, I grew up in a refugee, and when I was 5 years old, the Burmese military came and burned down our house, and then we moved to a different refugee camp. And every summer, we have to worry about, okay, we have to pack our backpack and with food and worry about, okay, where do we go next? What will happen next? Are they coming after us again? So we have to worry about those. And in 2008, I was really glad that we applied to come here and we got accepted, and then we came here. And then we came through Lutheran Services, and then they gave us a family friend that helped us see how important it is to live here and how do you live your life here in the United States. It's not like it's not like something easy, and from that I have learned that if I do something on my own, I will do better. If I do something and I help my community member, my refugee community member, to do this, teach them this and that, and they will be able to do things on their own, and they will make this place better, and they will be successful here.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Also, thank you very much for your passion. I think that's why everyone is here and everyone is just so proud of you, because you're like it is the passion that you've accepted the opportunity, which some people get opportunities and they don't take them. But what we have here is champions who have taken this opportunity. Sasha, as somebody who is working tirelessly with your colleagues to look at changing the way refugee camps are structured. I know that you've been looking with your teams on promoting self-reliance. I, for one, dealing with a fairly large refugee situation in Jordan, we recognise that what has taken place in the past, where refugees are, like the terminology is warehoused, or they're basically forced to be dependent on aid, is no longer acceptable. We have to find ways in which refugees, and I keep saying unlocking the potential because I believe in it so much, that refugees have the ability to provide for themselves, their family, for the community, and also the country which has been so generously hosting them. It's a population which we can't ignore. It's a population which is skilled, and as we see from our panellists here, who want to do well. And it's like the US is taking advantage of it. How do we get countries of asylum to take more advantage of it? Sasha.
Thanks, Andrew. I also wanted to say thank you for this honor and being here among such inspiring colleagues. And on behalf of Refuge Point staff in our Cambridge office in Kenya and across Africa, I'm honored to be here. Refuge Point is 10 years old now, and we stand on the shoulders of great and dynamic organizations that have come before us, like IRC, HIAS, colleagues at UNHCR. I wanted to share a brief story about how Refuge Point started that leads to self-reliance, but I was part of a small US-funded rescue team that was sent...
I've also told Sasha he's got 60 seconds.
Yeah. As part of a small US-funded rescue team that was sent into the Congo to evacuate people who were being massacred there. And we had a list of people we were told we could take out, and we were told under no conditions could we include anyone else not on that list. When we arrived in the safe haven where the massacre survivors had gathered, we found a group of widows and orphans who were not on our list. And we were faced with an urgent moral dilemma. Do we risk the lives of the people we know we can get out to try to help these few other widows and orphans, or do we leave them there where they would probably perish? My colleague and I discussed it over the night. We were told we couldn't take them. We decided we had to try. The US ambassador said we can try. We managed to get all those people out. They came to the US through our government's resettlement program, and I've watched over the past 15 years as those widows and orphans have grown up, married, gone to college, become US citizens, and become contributing members of society. I have seen refugees both here and across Africa and the world who, when given an opportunity, contribute in extraordinary ways and inspire us.
And I think that says a lot about you as a person and the team that you're with, that you put the refugees first. And probably the first word of advice that I got when I joined UNHCR from somebody who was a former representative in Turkey, he said, if there's a decision that you have to make, which is, may not necessarily be correct, if you're doing it in order to protect and save refugees, then do it. And I think that's the approach that we all have to do. Like there's too much bureaucracy, there's too many rules, there's too many regulations, and in the end we have to get back down to the basics. And I think this is where this panel is so important, because we've got the face of refugees. These are the people that we need to be helping. These are the friends, the relatives, the rest of the populations that have not had this opportunity. And we need to be doing much more out of our offices, in the camps. As Michael indicated, there's probably not enough oversight of what is going in the camps. There's probably too many reports being written about the vulnerability, and we need to get much more engaged in the thick of it. So congratulations. Gatala, Te. That's my best hope. So we've already, he said after I say it once, I can say Gat. So Gat, you're obviously a child soldier. I asked him to begin with, what were the areas that he'd like to talk about? Because sometimes it's not necessarily a great thing to be bringing up the memories, the past, but he was saying, fine, like I want to talk about the situation. I want to talk about the situation in the camps. And so, Gat, if I was going to be asking you, like, what would you like to see changed? And feel free also to interject, like it's not just for me to sort of put questions to you. Like, how would you like to have change made? What would you like to tell UNHCR? Or to the NGOs, or to the governments? Because often we just continue on with the same way of doing things day in, day out. And now that we've got Kelly Clements joining us as UNHCR's deputy, you've also got somebody who is, will take note and make sure that I do my job better. Okay, so yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew, and also thank you to the White House Task Force on New Americans, and also to all agencies that are here that are representing. And again, I also want to thank everyone who is here, panelists and the people that are watching. I'm representing an organization that really does work here in the United States, but at the same time also volunteering with others organizations back home. While I'm not going to be talking more about what we do here in U.S., I also wanted to make sure that you all know Nashville International Center for Empowerment, which is the organization that I represent, also will celebrate its 10 years this year on November the 5th, and we really want anyone to come and join us. The situation that I really wanted to see change in the camp, as someone who has been to the several camps, not only in Ethiopia, but also in Kenya and some other places, I would tell you, UN and all the UN agencies are doing a wonderful job. You guys are here.
What if I wasn't here?
So you guys are there for the people in need, and what you do is not really an easy thing. It is a real good job. But there are things that needed to be changed. I would see that the camp, especially the vulnerable people, the women, the boys and the girls who are now being taken advantage of, that are vulnerable of exploitation and some of the trafficking, had to be protected in the camp. There has to be some way to provide the protection in the camp, not only leaving the whole thing to the local OS, but also provide a way that the UN should, at least the UN agency should do a great job in making sure that the conscription of the children to the military when they are so young should not really be allowed, or using the women for sex war and all the other stuff that doesn't really seem to make sense. But at the same time also, the refugees who are not receiving the services that they need in the camp should be provided services. What are the reasons why people who can also do things in the camp are not being given tools for them to better themselves? I would see that if the education, which is very important for life, for any change, is not a priority of what needed to be done, because it's not a life-saving thing. We can also think of things that refugees can do, because some of these people left their home knowing something. But if you can capitalize the way to also educating them to use what tool they have when they are in the camp, that could also be overcoming some of the challenging. There are big challenges currently in South Sudan, where I represent. It is extraordinary, a very, very desperate situation whereby people are being killed. And then at the same time, people are going for days and months with no food. So should that be a way for them to be able to address this kind of thing? Should they be giving a protection so that they can cultivate by themselves? Or should the relief agency be relocated some other location where the people in need should also have the access to that? I think these are kind of work that the UN and other agencies should figure out how to make that happen and could happen.
Perfect, thank you very much. Man, you did not live in, sorry, Mariel, you didn't work in a, you didn't live in a refugee camp, but I dare say that you've got family and friends still in Syria. I assume that it must be very difficult for you here, looking at the news, hearing what's going on in Syria, And something which I was talking to Sasha about before as well is that last year, not only did we have the largest numbers of refugees or displaced persons in the world, we had the lowest numbers of returns. So in the spectrum of finding durable solutions, returns at the moment is becoming less and less a viable option. And across the Middle East and North Africa, we're not actually seeing the situation improving. So support to empowering the economic capacity of refugees, supporting the education, but also the resettlement side. We heard Ambassador Rice talk about the incredibly proud record that the US has of resettling refugees, but also providing migration opportunities for others. Is there anything which you think, given obviously also the concerns of many states on the security element, would there be one or two recommendations that you would also like to explore?
Although I feel powerless to change the current situation in Syria politically and socially, I'm committed to the power of music, and I believe in its ability to fashion peace and love in this world. I have a dream to go and visit the Syrian refugee camps and to be able to direct several music workshops. These children have been exposed to a number of extremely harsh and inhumane scenes, and I feel it's our responsibility to fill their life with joy and to return the smile into their faces. It would be great if we could convey to these children the choice of carrying a musical instrument versus that of carrying a weapon. Thank you. Through my performance last Saturday in celebration of World Refugee Day at the Kennedy Center, it was organized by the UNHCR, I sold some DVDs of my senior recital at Monmouth College, and I was able to raise $352. Of course, it's a small amount, but I'm wishing, and I really hope that with this amount, I'm able to buy 2 or 3 music instruments and be able to the refugee camps, and through some help from the international humanitarian organization, I can make my project bigger and bigger. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. There's probably just 1 or 2 questions that I'd like to pass to the panel before we open up to the floor. There was a theme for those people who've been working in the refugee camps or who've been living in the refugee camps in the past about the lack of security. And this is something which has been going, is a never-ending issue. We've talked about the need to provide energy for families to cook so women and girls do not have to go out and collect firewood, lighting, solar lighting in relation to the latrines, moving away from tents to something which is much more substantive, which can be locked. Going to Moan first, and then to Michael, then to Sasha, then to Latwak. Like, what would be like one recommendation that you would have to make people safer in a refugee camp? I know it's an impossible ask, but what, Michael first.
Yeah.
Before I give my recommendations, I would like to say my situation is very, very different from others in this panel. As an LGBT asylum seekers in the US, sometimes we are invisible to others, very, very invisible. Our situations are not counted among...
Can I just... invisible to the aid agencies who are ignoring your needs, yes. Invisible to the other refugees?
Yeah, invisible to the aid agencies. When I came here, when I arrived in New York City, I had to rely a lot on organizations who do not really cater for LGBT, for asylum seekers, housing works. I got to the country on October 2012 without not knowing where to go because there was no known organization who catered specifically for LGBT asylum refugees come to the States. So there was no program of sort. There was nothing that catered for many of us. We had to start a program from the scratch. Housing Works started something from nothing. So I'm just saying, like, that our issues are very invisible. We are very well unknown. People think that sometimes when someone from Russia is seeking asylum in the U.S., they'll ask, what are you seeking asylum for? There's no war in your country, so why are you seeking asylum? And when you say, well, I'm seeking asylum based on my sexual orientation, that people look at it differently, you know. Yeah. Even, you know, going for asylum application or go see an immigration officer just to get your asylum approved can take 2 years just to see them. You know, because your application, they have a lot of backlog, and during the time, you can work, you can access healthcare, you can do nothing. You know, just imagine leaving your family, hoping you come to this country to be safe, you know, running away because you felt you were endangered in your country, and just come to the U.S. hoping that you find that. But coming here can be, it can even be difficult. I came here just after a month. I was staying in friends' couches and friends' houses, and the person that actually housed me was shot and killed just after a month I got here. So you can imagine being faced by the issue of gun violence, and being faced by the issue of no housing, being faced by the issue of as an LGBT person, and compared to what I am as an asylum refugee, you know, as a stateless person. So you have different categories of issues that affect us. I'm going to show you something. I came here with my passport, with my travel document. You know, I travel a lot. I work for organizations which allows me to travel around the world, and I have to travel with passport. Anytime I travel, I'm faced with countless stigmatization based on the fact that there's asylum stated on my passport. People look at me differently. You are not from a country. There's no country in your passport. You stay stateless. Where are you from? I get that question over, where are you from? They just say, I'm like, well, you can see the U.S. gave me this passport, but where are you from? Yeah. But I'm a stateless person. I'm not from any country. I'm a refugee. So the fact that I have to carry this passport every day, everywhere I go, as a stigmatization, as a stigma passport, you know, it's just hard to the issue that refugees face. Sometimes you leave your country, you want to go to somewhere else and hoping that you'll be safe. So that's just a little about my issue. There's other issue when I was in Kenya. It's a very short story. I'm going to make it very short. I went to Kenya and I spoke to a friend, and he told me a story of a young man, 17 years old, from Sudan, an LGBT man from Sudan who went to Kenya refugee camp. Before he got to the camp, he got to the police station. When he got to the country, he was arrested based on the fact that he came in illegally, and he was detained at the police station. And then one of the policemen took him to the house and made him his housewife. He was allowed to stay indoors, never went out. It was made as a sex toy until he was rescued by one of the police officers who took him to the refugee camp. This boy became very sick. He had issues with his body, with his genitals, and he was later taken to see the nurse. And the nurse in the refugee camp didn't understand what was going on with him. He was like, I don't get it. How come you have such things on your anus, or what happens to you? Like, can you explain more? The boy couldn't say more because he was scared of what the nurse would think of him and how the nurse would treat him. The boy never got his medication. He died 7 days later. So those are issues, countless of issues that people live in their country hoping that, you know, they are living for a better place, and by the end of the day, they go to different other places and find other issues. I am going to end, but at the same time, I want to say thank you very much to Housing Works and Immigration Equality. Those people are in the front line of saving our lives, LGBT asylum refugees. If not for asylum, Immigration Equality and Housing Works, many asylum seekers from Nigeria, from Uganda, from Kenya, from Russia, from Ukraine, who are running for their lives because of who they are, because of who they love, come to this country without noticed. You know, there are no programs right now for us as LGBT asylum seekers. If not for those two organizations who are taking care of us, many of us would be dead by now, or would have had to return to our countries.
Yeah, no, and I said at the start, I've got the impossible job of trying to keep the time here, because, like, how can you stop Michael talking? Like everything that all the panelists are saying is we should hear. Like there's not one word which none of us should be listening to, and we should be talking for hours. But if anything, what I'm hoping for is that this is also a trigger for those people who don't fully understand the pressures that some of the refugees have faced in the country of asylum, but also coming here, that this helps you. So, Moan?
Yeah, I would like to say something. I'm gonna make it short. But before I
I've
say
lost
anything,
control, it doesn't matter.
before I say anything, I just want to say thank you to the White House Task Force on New America that work toward building community that welcome and embrace immigrant and refugee newcomer to their new country. And then I would like to thank our government that allow us to stay in the state, and then the Polk County Board of Supervisors. And we are the first fully funded ethnic-based organization that provides services in Iowa. I mean, and before I became a citizen, I became, this year, July, I'm going to be here for like 7 years. I mean, this is going to be my 7th year that I have been in the United States. And before I got my citizenship last year, and I was really happy. Excuse me. Before I became the citizen, I always feel like I'm a ghost. Like, people heard about ghosts, but have they ever seen ghosts? No. And it's just like that. When you're not a citizen, people are going to do whatever they can. When we were in Thailand, if you go to Burma, Burma is going to say, oh, you're not belong here, and then they're going to throw you away. And if you go to Thailand, Thai going to throw you away too. They're going to say, you're not belong to us. That's why we have like Embark organization, Ethnic Minority of Burma Advocacy Resource Center, to help the community to build ourselves, to learn. That's why we have navigator programs where we train the trainer to be the trainer for the community. And like for a short example, if I give you a penny and I said, okay, this is money, and then I come back the next day and I ask you, what is on the penny? Who is that? What is that picture? It's a head. Like, will you know, will you know who is that? And what is on the penny? What are the numbers for? What are the letters for? Do you know about it? So oftentimes refugees are put here 90 days, and then they don't have any help anymore. They say, okay, this is your place, this is your money, and that's all. And we help you, and you're on your own. You have whoever can help you.
There's no water here, is there, by any chance?
So it's not easy. That's why we have to help. We have to have refugees to learn what they can. So we need opportunities. We need training so that we can do better.
Yeah, I think there's common themes here: the protection in the camps, the invisibility, thankfulness for people who have helped the refugees get this start. But it's not given to everyone, and you've had to fight for it. And this is where it does make a difference. And you shouldn't have to fight for it. It should be streamlined. It should be expected. But
so you asked about recommendations. First, I want to say, Michael, thank you for being such an articulate advocate for LGBT refugees. It is such a critical issue. I think we all appreciate that tremendously. Thank you. I wanted to just interject perhaps a couple of things. Picking up on Ambassador Rice's comments around reaching the most vulnerable refugees, I wanted to just say a word about the importance that resettlement plays in saving lives, and how resettlement should be a tool that is accessible to refugees in life-threatening situations, no matter where they have fled. And we see that all too often it's focused on a few locations, and that's important for populations, but we do want to see that resettlement expands to reach the LGBT refugee in South Africa or in the Ivory Coast or other places, and that populations at extreme risk have access to that. The second thing is that in terms of vulnerable populations, children, as we know, make up the majority of refugees in the world, and in particular, unaccompanied and orphan children, who are a small minority of those, often face the greatest dangers. They face risk of attack, trafficking, forced servitude. We need to increase our capacity to address the needs of unaccompanied children through increasing best interest determinations, best interest assessments, and having a child-centered approach to our assistance.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah.
And I also would want to make it brief, but again, I will echo what you mentioned, Sasha, that resettlement plays a significant role in life of so many people. Where would I be today had I not been given an opportunity to come to this country, learn English, and then get back to the community and provide the services that I'm doing with the rest of you who are here today. So I think, going back to the need and challenges that are affecting so many people who are in the camp, who should be protected, but at the same time also be given chances to go somewhere to build their life and to gain some hope. I would say the resettlement program is an incredible program, and if we can expand it, not only to the people who, of course, the particular group that I just mentioned are needed, but also going so far to the groups that have been in a camp, and I mentioned one of the camp in Ethiopia, which had been there for long, and there had been refugees in that particular camp since I was in that camp 20-some years ago. So I think that would be incredible. I also wanted to make sure that we understand the challenge that are facing children, the kids who are as young as 5 years old or 6 years old, being conscripted or be taken to the military, or at least having nothing to be given to them. I would say protecting this kid or giving the children another chance is really, really significant, because, again, the future of the refugees is based on these children. Even though some of these kids lost both of their parents, giving chances to these children at least will at least reveal some sort of a hope for them. Maybe the way to do that would be to provide them some sort of a resettlement program, or at least within the camp, having them an education, which is the tool for their investment and their also protection within the camp.
Thank you very much. Okay. Marielle, and then we'll open the floor for a few questions if we've got time. But I think it's been important to let the discussion go, because it's an opportunity which you really probably haven't had before. I don't think they'd ever let an Australian into the White House before. So, so Marielle, just any last comments or thoughts before we ask for questions from the audience?
I would like to say that I'm so grateful to the American government for giving me my new life and for opening new doors in front of my future. I personally feel that America is home, and I stand here today not just as a Syrian citizen, but also as a devoted and loyal new American. Thank you, America.
So I'm looking at this very detailed sheet here, and we still have 10 minutes, so it's not actually that bad. So, which surprises me. So are there any questions so it should be short, should be sharp, and we should be after a recommendation out of it. Okay, so lady at the back in the blue, then the gentleman next to her after that. So what we'll do is we'll take 3 questions. Can you say who you are and where you come from, please?
Hi, how are you? My name is Dana Lee, and I work with the Kentucky Refugee Ministries in Louisville, Kentucky. With regards to the ideals of expanding resettlement, there are upwards of 14 million, 15 million refugees in the world, not counting internally displaced peoples, those seeking asylum and fleeing into Europe, and as well from Latin America into the US and into Australia. How do you see, since we only resettle such a small number, the United States brings in 70,000 refugees a year, compared to the staggering number of refugees? These refugee camps, these cities are becoming their home. When refugee resettlement is not a viable happening for them. How do we make these camps more hospitable to become a home, to become a city and a place that inspires self-sufficiency?
Okay. And the gentleman next to you?
Thank you. My name is Robinson Jerogedai, Kenya's ambassador to US. And thank you, champions. Your stories were really very telling. I just want to say 2 things. One, that Kenya, we have an open door policy on refugees. We are currently hosting over 600,000 Somali refugees. We are hosting over 200,000 refugees from South Sudan. And over the years, we have hosted refugees from Rwanda, but fortunately they have all gone back. We had hosted refugees from Uganda. Again, thank God they have gone back. But now we are faced with a problem in Dadaab camp concerning refugees from Somalia. They have been there for more than 25 years. Some were born there. They know of no other home. And yet, we are still calling them refugees. They are still under the care of UNHCR. So the question now is, to you is that we need to take care of this kind of refugee. Because the refugee is supposed to be a temporary situation. But when you live in a place for 25 years, that is home. So really I'm posing a question. That what do we need now to do for those refugees who are not really temporarily there? They have lived in a place for 25 years. They were born there. That's their only home. And that's the situation we are faced in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Gentlemen, 3 rows back. So short, sharp questions, particularly, preferably to the panel.
I will try to be as short as possible.
Yeah.
I promise.
I'm timing you.
Excellent. Okay, my question, I've heard so many people talk about vulnerabilities within refugee camps. And I've heard people, and I heard individual names, women, children, elderly. But there's one group of people that no one seems to talk about, and that's the young males within the family. In most of these cultures that we're talking about, the male is the fulcrum of the family. They are the provider. Having lived the life of a refugee, I came from Liberia. I lived in the Ivory Coast as a refugee for approximately 9 years. Lived in a refugee camp, went to refugee schools, and saw how the male were treated within the communities. Because at the end of the day, despite whatever United Nations does, the family still look to the male part of the family for that support. And if they're been in some way, somehow not treated accordingly, it has an impact directly on the family. And having lived in America as a refugee, not getting absolutely any support, becoming a homeless child on the street. I live as a homeless child on 12th and 14th Street for 2 years because many times when I applied for assistance, I was told, hey, you were strong enough to get a job. But my question to you is, what can we do to help that particular group of people, young male, who eventually become head of their families in situations in refugee camps so that it would empower them to be able to lead their families in ways that they should be able to?
Perfect. Let's leave it at that. I'd like to get the response. I think probably 2 of the elements are regards to resettlement. You're absolutely right. Like resettlement only offers a 1%, if probably less now, opportunity for refugees as far as a durable solution. May even be smaller, given the fact that the numbers are increasing and the security protocols have become tougher. But it is an incredibly important element of demonstrating to asylum countries that the international community is trying to do what they can. Certainly in countries like Jordan, we've been trying to ensure that resettlement states, particularly from Europe, do not focus on one particular nationality, religion, or ethnicity, and they focus on vulnerability. So that has to be the focus. Like, we've got to try and find who is the most vulnerable of the vulnerable who can be resettled. But I know Sasha's been doing some work on that, and I'll leave him to answer probably those 2 questions. Just to also show in regards to the last question, we recognise this in Jordan because the studies that we've shown is that the vulnerability of young men is the highest, because young men are do not get work permits, and they fall through the cracks for agencies providing assistance because exactly what you're saying. They should be able to work illegally. But if you work illegally, then... Oh, sorry. So if you work... Oh, my God, that's loud. If you work illegally, then you're open to be arrested and deported. So I get where you're coming from in that regards. But Sasha?
I want to first thank the Kenyan ambassador for Kenya's gracious hosting of refugees in very challenging situations over the past few years. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to interject. If you're going to do that, then we also got to thank Jordan. Lebanon.
Yes.
See,
Yes.
I didn't even know you were here. and who else represents an asylum country? Well, let me say to all the asylum countries who have been providing protection and assistance to refugees, because unless they offered that protection and assistance to refugees, we wouldn't be able to do our job. So,
thank you. I wanted to perhaps highlight the importance of new and dynamic ways that we can collaborate as a global community to address refugee situations. We have to find ways that refugees can move from situations of exclusion in the host countries to inclusion, so that they can be included more in the economic opportunities and in the other opportunities that nationals of those countries face. That is complicated. One space that we can explore these issues is a new coalition called the Solutions Alliance, which has regional dimensions too, and which is an opportunity, importantly, for host countries, diaspora communities, UN agencies, governments, NGOs, civil society, private sector to come together to collectively forge pathways forward so that refugees can be more included. And we're seeing some interesting momentum in that regard.
So we're basically on time now to end, and I know they're in the White House, so we've got to be spot on. We've actually got 3 minutes to exit the stage, which I think means that I'm very slow. But what I'd like to do is, because I'm very proud of these guys here, I'd like to have a photo opportunity, if that's okay, with them. And is there, do you have your family and friends here as well? Why don't you bring them on up as well? I'm taking advantage.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Where should... Guide us. Tell us where to go and what to do for the picture.
Okay.
Right here.
Well, yeah, let's stand in front. Come, Michael.
Sash, we're here.